This week on the agenda, Ontario still thinking about the Drummond Report, the moral price of a market economy, and America's Hispanic transformation. The Agenda's Week in Review begins with Ontario Premier Dalton McGuinty in his first interview since announcing his resignation almost 2 weeks ago. Okay, let's get into this. The proroguing. Remind us why you decided to do it.
Things were getting a little heated, and they're in danger of seizing up. The place has become overly partisan. One of the most astute observers of affairs at Queen's Park is a cameraman by the name of George.
Works for CTV.
Absolutely. And he said in his 40 years of observing activities at Queen's Park, the place has never been more partisan. Just one example. On 45 separate occasions, the opposition has moved a motion to adjourn the debate. That causes the bells to ring for 30 minutes. They did that 45 separate times. Most recently, the most important priority that we're seized with today being the economy, we'd like to move ahead with a bill that freezes public sector wages. Both opposition leaders have told us, in writing, they're not prepared to support that. We need an opportunity to cool off. We'll use this time productively. Something else to keep in mind, Steve. We're going to sit this year. We were scheduled to sit for 96 days. The average in the rest of the country is 51 days. We sit a lot more than everybody else. At the end of the year, as a result of prorogation and having sat extra days already, we will lose a grand total in the Ontario legislative calendar of 18 days. Not 8-0, 1-8. Now, what are we going to do with those 18 days? We're going to use them very productively. We're going to be reaching out to the labor community to see if we can land agreements that freeze public sector wages. And at the same time, we'll continue to work with our opposition partners to see if we can secure an agreement to a bill which they would support that would have the same effect.
This is the assumption that the legislature comes back after Family Day in February. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So is that a done deal? That's definitely happening? The legislature coming back?
That's up to the new premier, the new leader.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, just because I am who I am, I want to find out how you made that decision. Did you consult your caucus on proroguing?
No, I did not.
Did you consult cabinet?
Yes, I did.
Who in cabinet? At a cabinet meeting?
And no, it wasn't at a full cabinet meeting. But I feel it's incumbent upon the premier to use his or her judgment when and make a determination as to when and whether the legislature is still functioning in the public interest. So I made that call. Things were getting overheated.
Anybody tell you not to make that call?
There are always people on both sides of these kinds of things. I appreciate that. But my job is to figure out when the water is getting a little too rough. You blow the whistle. All right, everybody out of the pool. Everybody out of the pool. Let's allow things to settle.
Okay, but it's different this time. You acknowledge, because you're leaving.
Right. 18 days.
Makes it different.
18 days. Now, during the previous government, when they prorogued for purpose of a leadership, they prorogued for 5 months. Right? So I'm saying 18 days. And let's use those days very productively, which we are. And we've already got good results to report in terms of new agreements that we've already struck with the labor community.
When you went to David Onley, the Lieutenant Governor, and you asked him for prorogation, did he make you sit and cool your heels a bit while he thought about it, or what happened?
No, I gave him a heads up, phoned him first thing in the morning, told him of my intention, let him know why I thought it was the appropriate thing to do in the circumstances. And when I met with him, he agreed to it.
Right away?
Yep.
No questions?
No questions.
Here's, you saw your Globe and Mail this morning, I suspect. The lead editorial in the Globe and Mail reads thus: "The Ontario Liberals have a good record in government, but that record has been tarnished by the strategy to shut down the legislature and is at risk of being overtaken entirely in the next campaign." Are they right?
No. I appreciate the advice that all of our editorialists offer on an ongoing basis.
Maybe not.
From the comfort and convenience.
You did not say that with much sincerity. Yeah, but anyway, I hear you.
From the comfort and convenience of the sidelines. But I'm in the game, and I've got to make a call, and I believe I made the right call. I'll give you 2 examples of agreements that we've already secured. On Monday of this week, we landed an agreement with 11,000 public sector managers and professionals to freeze public sector wages. We did that outside the House. Just yesterday, we landed an agreement with 3 public sector pension plans. We've decided that in future, if a plan should be at risk, instead of immediately contributing more to that plan, we will reduce benefits coming out at the back end of that plan. And we do it in a way that protects existing retirees. That could save us up to $500 million every year. So just because the House is not sitting, just because we're losing 18 days in the legislature that sits longer than any other place in the country, doesn't mean we're not doing good work for Ontarians.
I hear you, and we've talked about that on this program, how the fact that just because the legislature isn't sitting doesn't mean government comes to a grinding halt. However, I think fair-minded people look at this and they see that the reaction has pretty much universally been negative, certainly among your opponents, but even among some people who like you. You look at letters to the editor, you look at online forums, you include the blog that we do here at TVO. I can't find anybody who thinks this was a good idea. Some of your cabinet ministers have already started to distance themselves from this. So what's the response to them?
Well, you may know we've prorogued 5 times already. You may know that in the previous PC government, I believe they prorogued 6 times. I believe the previous government to that prorogued a number of times. The last government prorogued for a total of 1 year. We will have prorogued over the course of 9 years. They were there for 8 years. They prorogued for 1 year. We've been there for 9 years. We're going to prorogue for a total of 7 months. So again, we sit longer than any other legislature in the country.
Okay, but
we've even passed a law mandating the attendance of the Premier and Cabinet Ministers at our question period. Mm-hmm. Nobody does more question periods than me and my Cabinet in the country in comparison to our provincial and territorial counterparts.
I grant you all that. However, in my experience, governments in the past prorogued because they wanted to put a fresh coat of paint on things, or they wanted a reboot or a fresh start, that kind of a thing. It feels as if this prorogation has more to do with shutting down legislative committees that are looking into contempt motions against your government, shutting down question periods so you don't have to answer uncomfortable questions about moving gas plants and the compensation you're going to have to pay to private companies to deal with that. And I want to play a clip. You can watch it on the monitor over me here. Here's Peter Russell, whom you know, the Professor Emeritus, University of Toronto, knows a thing or two about constitutional affairs, and he's not happy. Roll tape, please.
The principles of parliamentary democracy, they're not in the written Constitution. The Prime Minister is not even mentioned in the written Constitution. Principles of parliamentary democracy have been worked out informally in a part of our Constitution that's not legally enforceable. And a fundamental principle is the responsibility of government to the elected legislature. That's the principle that's violated here.
That's the principle that's violated, he said. This is different. It's not like a typical prorogation. He thinks you're kind of going around democracy here.
Well, I appreciate that opinion from on high, but I'm on the front lines. I work in a contact sport, and my responsibility is to make a call as to when things are getting out of hand. For example, so I talked to you about how the bells were rung on 45 separate occasions. Each and every instance, we would lose 30 minutes of debate time. This from an opposition party that maintains they're very interested in moving forward legislation. They also had a week consumed by a spurious, phony contempt motion. You will know that in the 220 years history of the Ontario legislature, no member has ever been found to be in contempt of the legislature. Okay? This is partisan games, I understand that, but we've got a responsibility that we owe to Ontarians. So I've come to the conclusion we can actually do more work for Ontarians during this dissolved 18-day period outside the legislature.
How long is it
than
again?
We could. I think we've got that now.
Okay,
and we could do inside the legislature.
So characterize it all, if you would, for us. What does the economy look like to you right now?
We are in a period of modest growth, as is virtually all of North America, Western Europe, and even as recently as today, we hear new numbers out of China. The Ontario economy itself, a lot of positive momentum in our mining sector, manufacturing's coming back. Government finances need to be dealt with, no question. We have laid out a budget plan to get back to balance. Last year it was $13 billion. We didn't think we'd be at $13 billion until another 2 years forward. Some people said, well, why don't you pull back your balance date 2 years? And I said, I don't want to do that because you want to always make sure you achieve your goals, and there's so much uncertainty in the economy.
But you're still predicting 2017, 2018 balanced budget.
Right now, but we're 2 years ahead of where we said we would be.
So it might be earlier.
It might well be. Now, the growth numbers you cited, the uncertainty in the world economy, I'm confident we can make these targets. Even the credit rating agencies have said that we're beginning to meet what they need. There's great uncertainty around the world, but
the
we
feedback
can
I'm
get
getting
there.
from people is that they're not sure how you're going to get there, because at the moment the deficit is sort of coming down like this, and you need it kind of to go down like this.
Actually, the deficits come from 19.6 billion 2 years ago to 13 billion last year. That's almost a third.
And you can get to zero within 5 years.
Yes. I've laid this out. My budgets have been audited. Our plan's been audited. We're 2 years ahead of where we said we would be. But make no mistake, the next 3 to 4 years in Ontario are going to be about getting back to balance. And that's where the hope and optimism is, because you know what? We do have a strong economy. Our mining sector is just really on fire right now. Agri-food business, very strong. Manufacturing coming back. Now, employment levels are still not where we want them to be, even though we've recovered every job lost and more in the recession.
Not the same jobs, though. You've lost good paying jobs and you've replaced them with less well-paying
No,
jobs.
not true. Real wages are up. There are jobs in the new economy. So there's actually an increase in income.
But the new economy jobs are a satisfactory replacement for the like $25 an hour manufacturing jobs that we once had?
They are, and in fact, we're getting high-paying jobs back, Steve.
Not that high-paying, though.
Yeah, just about, because don't forget, manufacturing jobs have been on the decline for 30 years. And so real incomes are actually up. Disposable income's up.
It's good to have all of you around this table this evening, and I just want to start. You watched the interview with the Minister of Finance, Peter Sherman. Start us off. Reaction.
Well, I think the minister believes his own nonsense, but he is part of a government that has brought Ontario to the brink.
Diane Francis.
Well, as a business writer, you know, I think this is terribly disappointing. The political culture of the Liberal Party is very disgraceful. I mean, first of all, they threw all kinds of money to buy an election, to cling to power. And then the CEO of the party, i.e. the Premier, who spent our money, the shareholders' money in the way he did, doesn't like the outcome, so he's quitting a year after he sought his office.
The analogy that Diane Francis gives of a corporation and having been a CEO and run a corporation for many years is as logical an analogy from a public perspective as you could possibly have.
Especially from a conservative, I agree.
Well, from a conservative or anybody else.
Not a conservative policy.
This is about the business of government, and this is about the expectations of the shareholders, and the shareholders are 13 million people here in the province of Ontario, and they haven't gotten a good deal, and now they're being told that they're going to get a worse deal. Let's look at interest. Interest right now is pushing on $11 billion a year that we're paying, the third largest single expenditure in the Ontario government period, with a big threat coming from credit rating agencies that we're not going to be able to continue. We're pushing on 8% unemployment. We have 600,000 people, men and women in Ontario, who want a job and can't get a job. Because why? Because we're not making the conditions in this province fertile for business. And so we've got a government that is walking away. And it's like a CEO saying, you know what, I can't do it, so screw it.
And yet, Michael Prue, yet, he has hit his deficit targets so far and says he is on track to meet his deficit targets going forward.
Why was he targeting deficits?
Has he? I mean, if you look, the first thing I did is, and you have the book right there, open to page 84 and 85, and you will see that he's running a $13 or $14 billion deficit this year, and next year he's bound and determined to take it up another $1 billion, and the year after that he's only down $1 billion. I mean, he's saying he's running 3 years of deficit in the $14 to $15 billion range. I don't think he's hitting any targets at all. And you know, what he is doing is he is putting us further and further into bankruptcy. I don't want to sound too much like a conservative, but that's that is where he is taking it. And let us not believe his spin on this, that it's slightly better and it's all on target. It's not on target. I don't know of any other government in the history of this country that's ever put that many deficits together in a row and said we're on target.
Can I add a footnote to
that?
that?
Many deficits of that magnitude.
Yeah.
My footnote is that if you take a look at the business model, you've never met a sales manager who doesn't undershoot on his revenue estimates so that he can create expectations and then overperform. I can tell you that with Dwight Duncan, he creates deficit figures that he knows he's going to attain. Then when he comes in at $500 million or $1 billion better, he pats himself on the back. Come on, we're talking about a guy who's patting himself on the back for essentially losing $14.4 billion. Give me a break.
Martin?
Mr. Sherman, let me introduce you to Jim Flaherty, the federal conservative finance minister.
We're not talking about
Jim
Flaherty.
You said you had never met a salesman of a company that had ever overshot, underscored, etc. The point is, Mr. Flaherty and the federal conservatives, not your party, your progressive conservatives, has consistently said that his budget deficit would be lower than expected, and then missed his targets. The complete opposite of Ontario.
Martin,
we're having fun with
I'm not getting into a push and shove on that, but the bottom line is, I could see missing targets for Flaherty or for Duncan if it were one time. This is an MO for Duncan. He does it every year, every time.
Let me get Diane and then Michael Prue, please.
Yeah, I mean, we have a political class, and it's all parties. It is absolutely a problem. Well, you haven't been in power yet. We'll just wait for the Greens, who brag about losing less money than they thought they would, and they make sure that they can lose less money than they thought they would. That's like a CEO saying, "Oh, great, we did really well. We were supposed to lose $1.5 million this year, but we only lost $1 million. Thanks very much." And I think the business analogy, the metaphor, is not only a common sense way to look at it, but to not get caught in all the verbiage and everything, because they are good at spinning. Everybody's good at spinning in the political world.
You would acknowledge there's been a great recession, and the government did have to borrow record amounts of money in order to prevent people from going off the edge. Yeah. You would acknowledge that.
Yes.
So what's the problem then?
The problem is they spent more money. They spent twice as much as the GDP grew by, going back all the way before the recession happened. And that was just not on.
And if you want to use the yardstick,
I promise Michael.
Ontario is 5th in terms of per capita money that we're taking in, but we're 9th, just slightly ahead of PEI in terms of our economic performance. Only Prince Edward Island has a worse record than Ontario. I don't think it's anything that the finance minister should be proud of. If he were to take us from 5th place to 1st place, or even from 9th place to 5th place, in the middle of the pack, I would think that he might have done something. But the reality is that we are the 2nd worst province in Canada in terms of our per capita expenditures and how we are dealing as a province.
An influx of Latin Americans, along with their culture, is changing almost every facet of American society. Here to tell us more about this transformation, what it means for the upcoming presidential election and for us here in Canada, is Carlo Date from the School of International Development and Global Studies at the University of Ottawa. Hello, nice to have you here in Toronto.
Oh, thanks for having me, Pia. Pleasure to meet you.
Carlo, many Canadians, have this image in this mind, this picture of the United States. It's pretty traditional. How much has that picture been changed by the growth of the Latino population?
It's been changed, obviously, in terms of numbers, obviously in terms of culture and political influence. It's moved the locus of political power from the Northeast to the Southeast. But it's also changed the U.S. in ways that we're just beginning to understand in Canada. For example, we had a shared history with the United States. Common history, culture, we would link to similar events. When Barack Obama became president of the United States, it's something that we understood. We've been with the United States on its racial trajectory with African Americans. We had loyalists come across up into New Brunswick. So we understand this. We may not understand it perfectly or treat it well, but we understand this. But with Latinos, this is a change that's occurring amongst a group with whom we have no historical connections. We have no cultural connections.
No shared language. Well, not no shared language, but a lot of their first language is Spanish.
And it's changing it in other ways too. For instance, in New York, it used to be that New York politicians would come to Canada to vacation. But nowadays, if you look, the Clintons, when they were in the Senate, when Hillary Clinton was in the Senate, their beach house, their summer place was in the Dominican Republic. Charlie Rangel, head of the House Ways and Means Committee, one of the most prominent African-American politicians in the States, his beach house is in the Dominican Republic. Bloomberg, he vacations in the DR. It's not for the sun and the beach, though it's nice there. They're going down there for votes and photo ops that they can bring back to share with the Dominican population of New York. It's crucial for races. So we're losing that connection with the United States. And you see it amongst younger politicians too. All the counties that ring Washington, D.C., Anne Arundel, Prince George, Fairfax, Arlington, The heads of the counties are going down to El Salvador to vote, not to look for votes and photo ops. So at the senior levels of U.S. political establishment and the up and coming, we're losing that connection. People are going to the South first. So you have a president like Obama who winds up in the White House with no real appreciation for Canada. And this will be the trend in the future.
When we talk about Canada-U.S. issues, one of the big ones is the Keystone XL pipeline. With the increased presence of American Latinos, is there any effect on how Canada should approach this issue?
Wow, great question. Just yesterday or the day before, a poll came out of Colorado, Hispanics in Colorado, asking how they felt about oil shale development, major issue in Colorado right now. And Latinos polled showing significantly greater concern over the issue of oil shale development, its impact on the environment, on water and air, than did whites and then did African Americans. This corresponds with polling done by the Sierra Club in California and the Los Angeles Times, each one showing significantly greater concern for the environment and environmental issues, and a propensity to vote according to environmental concerns amongst Latinos. So if I'm the guys at Keystone XL, go to your map and pull it out and take a look at Latino communities along the pipeline route. You've got an issue there.
Okay, you've been trying to get officials in Ottawa to pay more attention to the demographic shift and the issues that might be impacted. So what do you think Canada should be doing? I
think first and foremost, paying attention. I cannot say with certainty, I don't think anyone can say with certainty that this will impact the Canada-U.S. relationship. However, it's such a momentous change in the U.S., affecting all aspects of the United States, economics, politics, and we are so heavily involved, intertwined with the U.S., that you can't ignore this sort of issue. There may be problems, but there may also be opportunities in the future. So we really, given our relationship with the United States, of all countries around the globe, we need to be out in front of this issue.
Do you think Ottawa gets it?
I don't know. These days, it's impossible to tell what Ottawa gets and what Ottawa doesn't. I know in the past, they worked on the issue. They had a group in Foreign Affairs that was looking at it. They unfortunately didn't have the money or the resources to do the type of research that was necessary, and it's since died off. But yeah, knowing what people in Ottawa are thinking these days is difficult, and I'm in Ottawa.
It seems almost anything is up for sale in today's market economy. Joining us now to talk about the limits of this market and/or morality. In Newton, Massachusetts, Michael Sandler, professor of government at Harvard University and the author of What Money Can't Buy, The Moral Limits of Markets. And Michael, it's good of you to join us from Massachusetts. I wonder if we can start there with the title of your book, What Money Can't Buy. Care to give us a short checklist to get started?
Well, today, Steve, there are fewer and fewer things that money can't buy. If you're sentenced to a jail term in Santa Barbara, California these days, and you don't like the standard accommodations, you can buy a prison cell upgrade. It's about $90 a night. If you go to Washington, D.C. and want to sit in on a congressional hearing but don't want to stand in the long line, you can go to a line-standing company that will hire homeless people and others to wait in the long line, maybe overnight, and then you, like the lobbyists, can go in just before the hearing starts. More fateful things, too. If you look at the way we fight our wars, in Iraq and Afghanistan, there were more paid military contractors on the ground than there were U.S. military troops. This wasn't because we had a public debate about whether we wanted to outsource war to private companies. It just happened. And this has been happening throughout our society. The reach of market thinking and market values into every sphere of life, roughly, I think, over the past 3 decades. And what I'm suggesting is that we need to have a public debate about where markets serve the public good and where they don't belong. It's an interesting experiment. Some years ago, in Switzerland, they had to decide where to locate a nuclear waste site. No community wants one in its backyard. They had identified as likely to be the safest place, a small town in the mountains of Switzerland. But under the law, the community had to give its approval. So before the final decision was made, some economists did a survey. They asked residents of the town, if Parliament chooses your town, would you vote to approve the nuclear waste site here? Despite the risk, 51% said yes. Then the surveyors asked a follow-up question. They sweetened the deal. They said, now, suppose Parliament chooses your town and offers each resident of the town a yearly payment in compensation, up to $8,000 a year per person. Then would you accept? And what do you suppose the result was? Now how many accepted of what said they would approve?
Go ahead, you tell me.
Well, it was actually, the number fell in half.
Is that right? I would have thought it would. I thought it would have gone up.
Well, standard economic reasoning would suggest that it would go up. If you offer to pay people to do something, you add an incentive. And two incentives, according to standard economic reasoning, are better than one. So what happened here? Well, some people would say, once they offered the money, people thought, this may be riskier than I thought if they're willing to pay me. But they tested for that possible explanation. And the estimate of the risk by the residents was about the same before and after the monetary offer. So something else must have been happening. And what I think was happening, in fact, they asked the people, why did you change your mind? And their answer was, we didn't want to be bribed. See, in the first case, when they were not offered a cash payment, they were simply asked whether they would accept. They responded out of a sense of civic duty, civic responsibility for the sake of the common good. There is a real risk that introducing money and markets can change the character and the meaning of the goods and of the relationships at stake, sometimes for the worse.
Ronald, why don't you start us off there? What leapt out at you, maybe perhaps from the example that he gave?
Well, I think any reasonable person, apart from some economists and some zealous libertarians, can see there's something wrong with people selling part of their forehead to advertise New Zealand Air, or there's something deeply wrong about Walmart profiting from the deaths of its employees through insurance policies it's bought. So these things, I think, most people can see there is a problem here.
John Tomasi, what's your view on what you've just heard?
Well, Michael Sandler is calling on us to have a moral conversation about markets. And I personally welcome that call. I think he's right to say that this conversation is one we badly need to have. In the past 20 or 30 years, our understanding of the economic value of markets has grown greatly. We understand why markets are an effective tool. But it seems to me, as Michael suggests, that our understanding of the moral value of markets has remained stunted.
Matt Welch in New York, chime in if you would.
Yeah, I will probably be called a zealous libertarian here before the night gets old. I kind of take the opposite view, which is to say that markets are basically, we tend to sort of demonize them. It's just this word that sounds kind of bad to our ears, but they're just basically exchanges where people can voluntarily exchange goods and hopefully both get better out of the process. And so I think we should sort of undemonize that and also recognize that they've allowed us to have the kind of prosperity that allows us to exercise the exact values that Professor Sandel wants. And put it more simply, Switzerland is one of the wealthiest countries in the world. Switzerland, because you are wealthy, that gives you the ability to turn down $8,000 without caring about it too much. If that was in Romania, you would get a much different option. And that's as it should be. The wealth that we get from markets allows us to make decisions that are not based primarily on financial incentives. That's a good thing.
Michael Tomasky, can I get you to react to that?
Yes, you know, it's not just a question, I think, of our personal choices. There's something called society. And there's something called a common interest, or as Michael said earlier, the common good. And this is a real. This is kind of bold of me in the current company, but this is a question of political philosophy. That you know, it's a general conservative argument that if everyone pursues his own self-interest, then that will give you society, and that will give you a just society. It's a liberal view that no, pursuing self-interest isn't really enough, that there is this thing called the common interest, and sometimes we have to sacrifice a little bit of self-interest for this common interest. And this ties in my mind, very clearly to a debate between market morals and civic morals. And sometimes civic morals have to take precedence And we just do that far less often as a society, I think, than we did, 40 years ago.
Thanks to everybody for participating in our broadcast tonight. Matt Welch from Reason Magazine in New York, New York. John Tomasi in Providence, Rhode Island, the professor of political science at Brown University. Michael Tomasky via Skype in Silver Spring, Maryland, the editor-in-chief of Democracy. Ronald Biener from the University of Toronto. And Michael Sandler out of Newton, Massachusetts, the author of What Money Can't Buy, The Moral Limits of Markets. And that is the Agenda's Week in Review. You can see all of those programs in their entirety on our website, theagenda.tvo.org, or on our iTunes channel, or on our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/theagenda.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.